there, and welcome to the Briefing Room, our third episode right here at the ABC News Washington Bureau. We are going to be joined in a few moments by a whole raft of ABC reporters from Capitol Hill and the White House and beyond, and right here in the Bureau to bring you all the latest reporting and a ton of headlines, a literal ton of headlines. We got a lot to get through today on healthcare and the Voter Integrity Commission, a whole bunch of moving pieces here affecting the White House and Capitol Hill and beyond. But we are going to show you now Marc Short, who is the Director of Legislative Affairs over at the White House. Not a voice you hear very often, and we should note you're only going to hear his voice because, once again, the White House has required that the cameras be turned off for this briefing. So it is an audio-only briefing featuring, again, Marc Short, the Director of Legislative Affairs. When he is done, we will be here along with Cecilia Vega, Mary Bruce, and the whole ABC News team to break it all down. But for now, Marc Short at the White House.
Hey, Marc.
Yeah.
What is the president's current position on what he wants Congress to do? Is it repeal and replace, repeal now, replace later, or is it let Obamacare fall apart?
I think the president has been clear that what he wants is repeal and replace. That's what he said during the transition. That's what he said ever since. He has mentioned that if Republicans cannot find consensus on what the replacement plan is, then we should at least deliver on the promise to repeal. But his preference is the Senate bill as it's constructed right now. He expressed that openly in the meeting and walked through many of the benefits that are included in the bill, including the tax-free health savings accounts and additional monies that are provided there to pay for premiums. He mentioned talking about the opioid resources that are being provided for those senators in many of the Midwestern states that are particularly stricken by that epidemic. And also there was a lot of discussion about conversation about Medicaid. I know there's been a lot of coverage about the cuts in Medicaid, but I think inside the room there was clarity in recognizing that this bill continues to increase the absolute dollars in Medicaid spending to put it on a sustainable path. It is currently not on a sustainable path. What the bill will do, what current law will do, is it will bankrupt Medicaid and it will not be there for people. And what the president and those in the room are talking about is that the Medicaid expansion and the continued growth rate is a reduction in the growth rate, but that is not a cut. That is increased actual dollars. Yeah.
Marc, so a question for you. Can you kind of explain a little bit? The president said today, I mean, as the bill stands right now, not enough senators support it for to proceed. Yet the president said today publicly that they were close. Mm-hmm. So in what ways do you guys think you are close? Did senators give you any indication today that they're going to get behind this thing? And this kind of very public push from the president, it's not often we see him in this setting. Is this too little too late?
No, I think that the president is not too little too late. I think the president's been engaged throughout. As many of you know, he was making calls to senators when he was over in Paris earlier last week.
So public push, right?
This is a more public push, but he was certainly very public during the House debate. I think there's a difference when you have 240 House Republicans versus 52 Senate Republicans. And so the number of members who we're trying to convince at this point is much smaller. So some of the public display of that's going to be less. But I will say that to your question initially about what is it that we're going to be moving on to as far as the motion to proceed, I think that if you are not willing to vote on a motion to proceed, it's a little bit like Leslie Nielsen, a naked gun with an explosion behind you, and saying there's nothing to see here. What we're saying is that if you're not willing to move to proceed, you're basically acknowledging that there's nothing wrong, that Obamacare is fine. And we believe that Republicans have their opportunity to amend the bill, but you have to get on the bill first. And the president was making that case, and so was Leader McConnell, that look, for all of us who are trying to deliver on the promises we made to repeal Obamacare, we have to first get onto the bill. You can't pretend there's not an explosion behind you. You can't pretend that Obamacare isn't collapsing. You got to move on to the bill, and that's what the discussion was. Yeah.
What time is the meeting tonight, and who are some of the members who are invited?
Meeting's at 7:30. It's pretty much open to all members, but I think that it's focused on those who that are still in the undecided category. Yeah.
Marc, two questions really fast. On Medicaid,
yeah.
Did you get into the weeds in the conversation with the senators? I mean, not just talk about how we're going to make sure this is sustainable and make sure that people still have services. Did you get into the weeds about it? Because people are concerned about hearing these grandiose topics, or this can be done, but they don't have the substance behind it. Did you get into Medicaid? Did you get into the opioid issue? Did you get into the other issues in the weeds of when you were in the conversation? When they were in the conversation?
There was more conversation regarding Medicaid. There was an acknowledgement and discussion up front of the of the work of Senators Capito and Senator Portman on the opioid dollars that are inserted into the bill, but there was more discussion, I think, on the growth rate of Medicaid, and particularly I think Senator Toomey making the case that I articulated here, that we don't believe the current path is sustainable, and so the reforms that are in there help to make sure that the program is viable for future consumers.
All right, last question. Mitch McConnell said they didn't have 50 votes to. The president said, you know, we're close. But let's go beyond next week. Let's say maybe it doesn't pass after this vote happens. What's plan B? What's plan C?
We are confident that we will get this bill passed. We're confident that at the end of the day, we will deliver on the promise that's been made to repeal and replace Obamacare. So all of our efforts right now is to get onto a vote. To answer your question, it depends on what the amendment process is. That's the great thing about the greatest deliberative body in the world, is you can offer open amendments. And so this is an opportunity for members to make changes to the bill, but you can't make changes if you're not willing to at least have the conversation about it. So we're asking them to get on the bill first.
So you're not going to give up at all?
No. I don't think that...
If the amendments are not to your liking, you're not going to give up?
You know, I think there's a lot of people who have underestimated this president before. He's not one to give up. Yeah.
Questions. One is, you mentioned the meeting being open to everyone. Does that include Democrats?
The meeting is open to the Republican conference. I think that if there are any Democrats who are willing to work with us on the repeal and replace effort, I'm sure they'd be welcome to.
And second of all, does the White House approve of FreedomWorks giving out Trader Awards to those who vote no on the motion to proceed?
I don't think we have any comment on what FreedomWorks is doing.
Do you support it?
I'm not familiar with any Trader Awards that they're giving, so it's hard for me to comment on that. Thanks. Yeah.
Senator Murkowski and Moran have said that the president had strong words for them, including some negative words for them once the cameras were out of the room. How productive do you think it is for the president to essentially be calling out people who voted against this or have severe questions about this?
I don't think he had strong words. I think that that the conversation was very respectful, and it was one of disagreeing on a couple of points. But I don't think that there was any badgering. I think the president was trying to be an encourager and say, "Here's how we need to get there, guys, and let's get it done." Because not only is this a promise we made to the American people, there are Americans who are suffering right now. They're suffering without us delivering on the promises that we made. It's time to solve that problem for them.
If he's asking them to stay in for the August recess, what is he going to do differently in the coming weeks? The approval for this bill is still, incredibly low. Does he have any more plans of traveling to some of these red states where they're from to try and explain the bill more with the megaphone that only he has?
I think that I think you'll see that in one form or another. I think that several senators raised the notion that the president could be extremely helpful to them and making that case, and I think that he was receptive to that. I do think that overall, collectively, it's often easier to be against something, and that messaging is easier than it is to communicate what you're for. But I think there's a lot of things in this bill that the president started his remarks by saying, look, guys, here are all the things that we're doing in this bill that we should be talking about that are positive for the American people. And so I think you'll see that engagement.
Mark, you were talking about the president being open to going out and trying to sell this. But the president's a branding person. You talked about, the need for Republicans to recognize you can't, bet on Obamacare imploding. But it seems like the brand you're selling is Obamacare's failing, not here's what the plan is. Are you recognizing here that there hasn't been a clear message from this White House as to what it stands for in this health care bill? What do you mean when you say the president was receptive to what the senators were asking him? And what does close mean?
In which part? I think
the president said we're close. Are you talking about votes?
Yes, I think he's talking about how close we are in the votes. That he's had conversations over the last couple of days from some of the senators who have publicly come out and said they wouldn't vote for the motion to proceed, but they've communicated to him that, actually I was getting a lot closer, and so give me a little bit more time. Let's work through a couple more things, and we can get there. So I think that's what he's communicating when he says that we're close.
But in terms of what the message is that the president is going to be selling in these states if he visits them, what is the message other than it's not Obamacare?
Well, I think that there's several things. There is part of that I think Americans have rebelled against, which is the individual mandate. Part of that is the taxes that are buried inside the bill. And I think that relieving Americans of that makes a big difference. Another part that we will sell is that we will be reducing... we will be
When you say that, you
reducing,
mean cheaper.
we will be reducing costs, which I think is an important component. Estimates of 30% over the next few years, and I think some estimates with the consumer freedom option have suggested that it's even greater than that. One of the things we're selling is that we're actually trying to return the relationship between a patient and a doctor as opposed to the government being in the middle. And I think there's also protection of life that for many of our constituents is really essential and important. And that's a promise the President's delivered on and that many of our supporters cherish. So there's a lot of things in this bill that we can trumpet, and I think you will see it happening.
Did the president recognize he hadn't done those things?
No, I think that the President has continued to be active in this effort. I think that he's hearing from senators who say, you know, your efforts in being able to communicate on this is a bully pulpit that is greater than ours, and so we'd welcome even more. But I don't think there's a sense that he hasn't been active.
To get some of the senators who are concerned about the Medicaid expansion on board, is it being discussed at all about increasing the growth rate for the Medicaid program beyond where it is now in the GOP bill? Like, what if we increase it a little bit more beyond where it is right now in the Senate bill?
I think there's been a lot of resources provided in the stabilization fund that's continued to grow, so there's now $180 billion in the most recent draft of the bill that will be provided in many cases to help with that transition. The growth rate doesn't slow until 8 years into this process, and I think that the vast majority of members in the Senate conference are very comfortable with the way it's written right now.
And just one more follow-up. The president has appointed words for some of the senators in there. Is he sending a signal that if you don't vote on this bill, I won't be there to support you in 2 or 4 years?
No, there's not a sense of a veiled threat. The president's pretty direct in his words, and he's right now saying, "This is what you promised. I want to live up to my promise. I'm ready to sign the bill. Get me the bill so we can get this done for the American people, and then we can also move on to tax reform and other items that are part of our agenda." Yeah.
Mark, on the issue of subsidies, the president said we pay hundreds of millions of dollars a month in subsidies that the courts don't even want us to pay, and when those payments stop, it stops immediately. Is the president actively considering ending the cost-sharing payments, especially if it just doesn't pan out in the Senate?
I think he's basically stating a fact. The courts have ruled that the Congress never appropriated those dollars. And he's acknowledging that and saying that here we are propping it up in ways that are keeping Obamacare afloat that the courts have already ruled we arguably shouldn't be doing. So, yeah, he's concerned about that policy, and he continues to evaluate it each month.
He has to make a decision next week on whether to fund it the next month, correct?
He is continuing to evaluate that. It's an ongoing basis. Yeah.
The president asked senators to stay in town until he's got a bill on his desk. Is he going to stay at the White House until that happens?
I think the president will be traveling, but I would imagine that members will be traveling too. So I don't know that that's a fair comparison. But he will be here working on it as long as they are, and he wants to get it done. Well, because members will be traveling home on weekends too. So it's not a matter of being here; it's a matter of whether you recess the Senate. And he's encouraged that they stay focused on in town until it gets done. Yeah.
You mentioned this idea that they can proceed to debate and then they can offer amendments, but hasn't the issue been that there are factions in the Senate and throughout the Republican Party that have just very different ideas of what they would want out of a bill? So what amendments do you think could be offered that would satisfy both the conservatives and the moderates who've raised concerns about these bills?
I don't want to try to limit that because it's an open amendment process, and I think that there's a lot of different options. But certainly, I think that Senator Lee is interested in expanding it from a single risk pool to a 2-risk pool. I think they're moderate members who want to see additional dollars provided in Medicaid funding. So I think there's a lot of different amendments that could still be offered. Some who want to block grant more dollars down to the states. Those are certainly a few, but I think that there's a lot of creative ideas that members have that can continue to improve the bill, and we're open to that. As I said from the start, I think if you're saying that you're not willing to move to the bill, what you're in essence conceding to the American people is you're comfortable with Obamacare, and all the campaign promises you made were hollow. So it's time that we get on the bill and we can then amend it and fix it. Yeah.
Did something change between yesterday at lunch when the president said he's very disappointed? He's learned that he needs more Republicans in the Senate because there clearly aren't enough now. That was yesterday, and then today at lunch he said, let's do this. So, did you advise the president to give it one more go? Did Leader McConnell say, "Hey, we're going to have this vote next week. Keep the momentum going"? What changed between yesterday and today?
I'm not so sure it's inconsistent to be able to say, hey guys, we need to keep working at this till we get it done, and also expressing the desire that we wish there were more Republicans in the Senate because some of these efforts we could move more quickly. I don't think that that's inconsistent.
Does the president not think that he needs more Republicans? He has enough now?
I think that you will see him in 2018 working hard to make sure that the number of Republicans in the Senate continues to grow.
Mark, at what point do Republicans own health care in America?
I think that's a good question. I think as soon as we're able to replace Obamacare with our solution, then at that point it will begin the ownership. There will likely be a transition period.
But to be clear, so right now you control the Senate, Republicans control the House, they control the White House. So why, if they're unable to accomplish it now, aren't they responsible?
At this point, I think that there's a difference between saying responsibility and owning it. I think that we all feel a level of responsibility. That's why we're trying to change it, in honesty. But as far as owning the Obamacare policies, I'm not familiar with any Republicans who voted for Obamacare.
But health care in general. Americans don't care about Obamacare now. They just care about their own health care.
Sure, but I think I think in many ways that's one and the same, Peter. At this point, there was not a single Republican who voted to pass Obamacare, and so I do think that is still the law of the land. Until we replace it, I think that they own it.
Yeah, quick follow-up on this conversation here. The president tweeted recently that, quote, the Senate must go to a 51-vote majority instead of the current 60 votes. Is the president not concerned that perhaps somewhere down the line the Democrats might try to repeal the what will then be health care bill, especially as there aren't any Democrats that are supporting it now?
I think that in general, I think it's better for us to leave the rules of the Senate to the Senate. But I think the president's comment is making the case that he feels very certainly that if Senator Schumer were in control, he would change the rules of the Senate in a heartbeat. And so I think that's what his concern.
Why would they go back and forth every 4 to 8 years?
And it's possible that it would. I just think he's acknowledging that Schumer would do this if he had the opportunity.
But is that a solution, though? Is temporary?
Can I clarify something in your answer to Ken? Under the option of repeal and delay, one option, or the option of failure and the Affordable Care Act remains the law of the land, there's a period of time in which the president is in charge of the Affordable Care Act. In response to the question from Ken, you suggested the president is considering withdrawing the subsidies. My question to you is, if he is in charge of the Affordable Care Act under either of those two options, you do not think there will be political repercussions if the president were to withdraw and try to hasten the demise of the existing law?
I think that the president wouldn't view it as what are the political consequences. He's going to view it as what's right. And right now there's a legal opinion on that. And I think that there's additional opinions being researched within our White House and giving him different advice on what should be the best course of action on this. I know where his heart is. I think he's expressed that very openly, what he thinks of those payments. But as far as what the next step is, I think that we'll find out in the near future.
Follow on.
Yeah.
To the members that he talked with today, they would not have any political repercussions to face?
I don't know. I think that if the courts have said that this is right now it's an unconstitutional payment, but we've put it aside as it continues on appeal, I think that's something that we need to consider as to what should be the right action of our administration.
Yeah, thanks. The president specifically raised Dean Heller's race next year, and saying that he would like to remain a senator, aka get on board with Obamacare. Did he make some kind of specific promise to Senator Heller that if he supports this bill, that the president will be there to campaign for him next year?
Look, there is not a quid pro quo, but I'm sure that the president looks forward to supporting Dean Heller's reelection.
Can I follow up to that, please? Was there some thinking behind the seating arrangements? Dean Heller, Tim Scott, Capito, Murkowski, because are these the people he thinks are easier to get to yes or harder to get to yes?
I think that the president, I think, welcomed the chance to have one-on-one conversations with Dean Heller during the lunch. I think that that's an observed fact, but I don't want to comment on exactly how strategic the seating was. That's part of our job. John?
Thank you, Mark. Supporters of repeal and delay say that they are not worried about enactment of the Biggs Amendment in the House. In the Senate, 3 Republicans have said they are against it so far, Senators Capito, Murkowski, and Collins. Are those people that, if repeal and delay got to the Senate for a vote, the president would try to influence and talk to to support repeal and delay?
Again, I don't want to really differentiate those, John, because I think the president is trying to say we need to get on the bill to amend it. And if you're not willing to do that, you're basically saying there's no problem here. And so, yes, McConnell has said the first bill he'll bring up is the 2015 bill. And that's the first step. But there'll be an open amendment process to continue to bring in a replacement effort, too. Yeah.
Mark, two questions for you. Following up on Peter's, I understand that the White House's argument is that Democrats own this as a policy matter, but from a political matter, as you mentioned, this is the president in the room with Republican senators. If they can't get this done, and I know you say you're confident that they will, but if they can't get this done, is it politically the problem of the people in that room for not being able to get it done?
We're going to get it done.
Okay. I get that your answer. Let me go to one other thing that you said. You said that the president's always said that repeal and replace is his policy, and that's certainly what he's saying today. Just yesterday he tweeted and said, as I've always said, let Obamacare fail and then come together. Since there are two versions here of what the president has always said, can you at least acknowledge that the White House has been somewhat inconsistent on this?
What I think I said to start is that the president's preference has always been repeal and replace. If I didn't, I apologize, but that's what the president's preference has always been repeal and replace.
Okay, just looking at the president's own words, the 4 or 5 different positions in the last 48 hours, there's been some inconsistency here from the president, correct?
The president is committed to repealing Obamacare and replacing it with a better solution.
You don't think there's been any inconsistency?
I think that we are for repeal and replace.
What conversations the president has had with Senator McCain, who obviously couldn't be here today, but as you know, issued a statement on Monday night saying he wanted to start from scratch with the Democrats because he didn't want it to be a single party issue the way it was during the last administration.
I think that the president has wished Senator McCain well. Our thoughts and prayers are with him, but I'm not going to divulge any of the private conversations they've had on that matter.
Mark, you mentioned the protections to life in this bill. Tell me exactly what you meant by that and why the president supports that.
So the tax credits have Hyde Amendment protections in them to ensure that dollars are not used to pay, taxpayer dollars are not used to pay for abortions as well. There's a year prohibition of federal funding for Planned Parenthood.
Can you talk about the priority of that to this president? How important is that?
I think that the president, from the very first day of the administration, has pursued pro-life policies. He promised that on the campaign. You look at Mexico City and the reversal he did there from the very start. He expanded even to include international, beyond that, international funding of abortions. I think that this was the first vice president to speak at the March for Life rally. The president has been, I think, very consistent in putting forward federal judges who respect life. And so I think that it's been a consistent part of the administration. And so, sure, it's a priority in this bill, too.
Mark, thank you. You're giving us a lot of ambiguity here on this issue of CSR payments and whether the president's going to make them or not. But a number of insurance company executives have said
I think it's the president's
ambiguity that's causing them to have to raise premiums going into next year because they don't know whether those payments are coming or not. What do you make of the argument that says that it's actually the fact that they can't plan for next year that means that prices are going up for consumers?
I think that the price has been going up for consumers for quite some time. Would you not disagree with that?
Clearly, that's your position. But my question is, are you adding to the price increases by putting that ambiguity?
I think that there were,
as insurance companies have to make
there were
decisions about what
promises
they're
that
gonna
insurance plans would decrease the forecast by $2,500 per plan. They increased by over $3,000 before this president came into office. To suggest that the premium increases are a result of our stance on CSR payments, I don't think it stands.
So with that deadline looming, what should insurance companies do?
And let me also offer this, that despite the fact that we're still considering what to do with it, this administration has continued to pay them. So I think it makes it additionally harder to say that there's any price increase that's been related to that to date. Yeah.
Mark, does the White House support the Senate bill introduced by Rob Portman and Ben Cardin that would outlaw Americans supporting an international movement to boycott Israel?
I'll have to get back to you on that one. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm curious about, a lot of people might be concerned about how Planned Parenthood funding might be related to the stall in this health care issue.
I'm sorry, your question is how the Planned Parenthood funding is related to the stall?
Funding would be related to the stall in health care.
I'm not sure it is related to the stall. I think that there's support for the position right now when When the bill passed 10 times in repeal only, it denied Planned Parenthood funding. So I think that that's been a consistent position that has support from the conference.
Question on a different topic. Last week,
Yeah, go ahead.
on a different topic. Last week, during the debate on the defense authorization bill, there was an amendment that was voted upon and rejected that would have banned the Pentagon from funding surgeries for transgender people in the military. In defense of his vote against that, Representative Justin Amash said Secretary Mattis and the White House urged a no vote on that amendment. Did the White House urge lawmakers to vote no on that amendment?
I'm not familiar with the White House urging a no vote. I do think that there was a position as to whether or not that amendment belonged on NDAA, and there was some discussion about withdrawing, but I'm not familiar with us whipping the vote one way or the other.
But the White House sort of position that the amendment was unnecessary.
I'm not saying it's unnecessary. The position was whether it belonged on NDAA.
Mark, can you say if Corey and David Bossie were working as your lieutenants on this bill?
I wish that Corey and Dave Bossie were my lieutenants on some days, but no, that's not the case.
What were they doing?
I don't know what you're referencing.
There was a story that they were working.
I have seen the story.
Lobbying for you. No?
I'm not familiar with that. Yeah.
Take one last
question. Senators Graham and Durbin are reviving a piece of legislation that would address streamers through a legislative process. What's the administration's position on that?
I think that the administration has opposed the DREAM Act and likely will be consistent in that.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, welcome back to the briefing room here in the ABC News Washington newsroom. A lot to get to today because there were so many headlines. But we're joined here in the Bureau by John Santucci, who was our guy on Donald Trump back before anyone thought the whole Trump thing was anything. And he's never let up on the beat. Not one day, not 1 hour.
No.
6 months in.
No.
And Catherine Falder's part of our White House team over there who's been duly tracking all of these briefings. How long is it now since we saw on camera?
Oh, gosh, we're on day 20.
Day 20.
Day 20,
okay,
Rick.
so the count continues. So we'll get to that issue as we proceed. But you just heard Mark Short. Now, he's the director of legislative affairs over at the White House. So they went pretty deep into the weeds. So they decided to bring out Mark Short. Mark is one of the best connected Republicans around.
Sure.
He worked for Mike Pence for a while. He worked for the Koch group for a while. He has been the main point man through all of this. And he right now is facing capital chaos, guys.
Yeah,
I mean, this is
bad week for him.
There really is no strategy that they can point to. They've been all over the place at every step.
It almost feels like this is a racquetball in a way, because it's gone on all different walls and bounced around, and we really don't know where they stand right now. I mean, I know Mary's going to join us in a second, but I don't even know what letter of the alphabet we're up to anymore. We've gone from liking Plan A, no, we don't like Plan A, B, C, D, it's all over. And for the moment, we know the president had that lunch earlier today where it seems like, Rick, that we were going back to repealing and replacing. But yesterday he said just repeal it and get it over with at this point. I mean, it's crazy, Catherine.
And look, I think that's a great point. And you look at where he was as a candidate and on the campaign trail. It was his signature campaign promise. We're going to repeal and replace simultaneously. Then we went to let Obamacare fail.
Right.
Then we're going to repeal it and not replace it. Then we were at fail again. And Mark Short was asked about that today, and he cleared it up a little bit, saying, he wants to repeal and replace. That's what the president wants to do. But if we can't get there, then we'll repeal it and replace later. So there was no talk about Obamacare failing. But at the same time, the president, as you mentioned, racquetballing all over the place.
Let's listen to what the president said. Let's listen to what the president said earlier today. He had all those. The senators got back on buses today, and they got to go over there. Right. And here was Donald Trump afterward.
I've been here just 6 months. I'm ready to act. I have pen in hand. Believe me, I'm sitting in that office. I have pen in hand. You never had that before. For 7 years, you had an easy route. We'll repeal, we'll replace, and he's never going to sign it. But I'm signing it. So it's a little bit different. But I'm ready to act. For 7 years, you promised the American people that you would repeal Obamacare. People are hurting. Inaction is not an option. And frankly, I don't think we should leave town unless we have a health insurance plan, unless we can give our people great health care, because we're close. We're very close.
but how close are they? That really is the question. And the other part the president did in that meeting, which I don't know if it caught you guys, but stuck out to me, is at one point, well, two things actually. One, he says there's many friends in this room. Well, maybe they're not going to be friends after this. Who knows? We'll see. And the other thing he did is that Dean Heller, who's a senator from Nevada, sitting right next to him, and you guys both saw this, he turns to him and says, I thought it'd be you at one point, but he, it was weird that he almost pulled out and says, if you still want to be a senator after all this, a threat. Really pretty clear.
So we told you at the top that we're going to be joined by our correspondents at the White House and Capitol Hill. Cecilia Vega's been drawn away a little bit because she's prepping for World News Tonight.
Right.
Start getting that witching hour. But Mary Bruce is joining us right now up on the Hill. Mary, what do you make of the day? More buses revved up. All these guys over there. Mitch McConnell says there's going to be a vote. Who's got this one figured out?
Today, I think it's even more dizzying and confusing than yesterday, and that is saying something. Look, yesterday at this time, we were talking about what to do with Plan D, and I think it was Plan A, a repeal and replace wasn't going to work, Plan B and C, just a simple straight repeal wasn't going to do it, and now you have the president going back to Plan A. It's a lot to take in, and it's not just leaving our heads spinning up here. A lot of members who are trying to digest this, figure out what comes next. It's not an easy answer. Look, you heard Mitch McConnell come out after his meeting with the president and say that he does still plan to move ahead, the same plan that we heard yesterday, which is they want to go ahead and hold this vote, at least get this issue onto the floor, then hold that vote on a straight repeal, and then, he was quick to mention that they're going to have a chance to amend it. This would be an amendment palooza. Everyone trying to come up with some kind of way to get to that sticky replacement question. That's the big holding point here is what do you do to actually replace this? But look, we're right now talking about process because last time we checked, this still doesn't have enough votes to even get to the floor. More or less to figure out how you're going to solve all these big problems. So you have the president here rallying the troops, encouraging everyone to keep at it. And look, there is at least one point of agreement up here on Capitol Hill. Everyone knows this is their signature promise to the American people. Republicans know they have to do this. They all agree on that. But how to do it, what that looks like, whether they can even begin officially debating this issue, well, it's all really up in the air.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell's either calling bluffs here or he's just getting over with it. I mean, he just wants to be done with it, perhaps. So, charting it out a little bit. So, Plan A, by my count, check me on this, was repeal and replace. Plan B, repeal and delay. C was let Obamacare fail. You were able to read that, Santucci?
No. Honestly,
so
Rick, you should have been a doctor with your handwriting. I gotta be honest with you.
My mom might agree with you. But I think we are now in Plan D, which is all of
we're back to the not being able to count.
Which is all of the above. All of the above, which actually means none of this. You might as well just cross it all out because there is no plan right now. This is just throwing stuff in the wall and hoping that it's going to work out.
Right?
And look, and I think you see the real frustration, the White House and Capitol Hill with the senators, among the senators toward the White House, going back and forth about the fact that they just can't get this done.
But Mary, let me ask you this though, because you're up there, you're obviously talking to all of these folks. I mean, what do they all say when they come back from lunch with the president when he's basically shellacking them in front of everybody, doing that whole on-camera spiel, threatening Heller sitting right next to him, and then throws the cameras out? I mean, what's their reaction?
It's
they sit there and take
Washington line. I have to say, it's 3 words. You hear it in this town all the time, and it often doesn't mean much. Very constructive meeting. You hear a lot of that. What does that actually mean? And we did ask a lot of people as they were getting off that bus. It is, I have to take a tangent here, it is one of, my favorite funny things about these kinds of days when everyone gets on the bus. They make these field trips up to the White House, and then they all arrive, and we're standing there, the press, all of us waiting in this huge scrum to try and grab them coming off there, savages waiting for news. But the big question was, well, what did they make of the president, for instance, calling out Heller there? That kind of awkward moment, Heller tried to kind of smile, laugh it off. I've been watching some of those GIFs that have come out on my Twitter feed, hitting them over and over and over again, the slow-mo GIF of Heller trying to laugh it off. But what do they make of that? The president trying to ramp up pressure on their colleagues who are questioning this approach. And, everyone's tried to laugh it off like the president did. Oh, the president, that's just his way of doing things. He has his way of doing things, we have ours. But it has an impact up here, and I don't know if it necessarily helps the president's cause to be publicly calling out some of his opponents like this, because if you're someone like Dean Heller and all of a sudden you do, change your mind and you do decide to back this repeal and replace measure, or just repeal, or whichever plan A, B, C, or D you're on at the moment, does he look like he's, caved to the president? Does he look like he's not standing by his principles? It's a bit of a lose-lose. So whether that's the best strategy for the president remains to be seen, and I don't know if it necessarily sits well with everyone up here in this building, but publicly, very constructive meeting.
And part of the problem that Republicans are dealing with now is their frustration is often at their colleagues. It's not just the White House versus the Senate. It's like, we voted on this thing already, guys. Just get it done. Just do it already.
We've got some good infighting then, right? Because that's their point. That's part of why Mitch McConnell is known as this master strategizer, because he's saying, look, you voted on this before. This passed in 2015. We voted on a straight repeal. You supported it. So now are you going to be a hypocrite if you come out and don't support it after all? But of course, that was a massively different situation. You had Barack Obama in the White House. That was essentially a show vote. They knew he was sitting there with his veto pen ready to go, in the same way that President Trump now is sitting there with his pen ready to sign something into law. And he made that point sitting there in the meeting at the White House today, that this is a different situation, that they have to take advantage of the fact that they've got, the Senate, the House, and the White House all controlled by Republicans. But look, this is not easy, and the president is learning that. There have been so many questions about whether he should have been more involved up front, whether this is too little too late. We're having a lunch meeting now. How many months into this conversation? We've seen how many of those items on your whiteboard fail, and now you're having lunch? You're going to have another meeting here tonight. Is that going to cut it? I don't know.
I mean, let's just face it. Rick's whiteboard.
Don't knock the whiteboards.
I'm sorry. I'll respect the
messy.
whiteboard. Yeah.
It's getting messy already. But another big issue coming up today: the first meeting of the president's Voter Integrity, Election Integrity Commission, and this was really striking because we all remember the tweet that seemed to launch all of this, right? And Catherine. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about this today. We didn't show that portion of the briefing today, but she was asked about it, and she said, look, the president was just stating his opinion on that. He's entitled to his opinion.
Now, we were talking about this a little bit before. That comment is frankly shocking. He tweeted this out. He said, he alleged that millions of people voted illegally. It cost him the popular vote. He stated it on Twitter, and I am going to be investigating this. I am going to create a committee, a panel to investigate voter fraud. So to say it's just his opinion, and you have this massive commission, bipartisan commission, they say, tasked with investigating voter fraud, and they say voter suppression and voter integrity, but to say that it's only an opinion, but here we are, the Vice President of the United States is tasked with heading this up. They have their first meeting, and the amount of money it costs taxpayers to say that it doesn't matter what he thinks, he'll accept the conclusions, which I'm not sure that's going to happen. But it was just his opinion.
But and we should also mention, you and the team there, you guys broke the story that they were putting this commission together several months ago. It's taken a long time to get this thing off the ground.
It's taken a long time to get this thing off the ground, and when we broke that story a couple months ago, they didn't have everybody in place yet. They were still asking people to be a part of this commission. And frankly, what's the most interesting about this is that the reason this was created was because of those claims that millions of people voted illegally in the 2016 election. But now you see the White House is backtracking a little bit on that. They're saying, well, we want this to be forward-looking. We want this to be about voter suppression and voter integrity in our systems. We don't want to think about 2016, but we want to focus on down the road. But that's really not why we have this in place.
You also had a threat from the president today, really a threat that this information is going to come from the states. And what are you hiding if not? And this is, remember, he controls the Justice Department. They can do a lot of things around voter rights. There's a lot. Exactly.
And I'm struck by that comment. What are you hiding? Why aren't you passing over this information? But I have to tell you that when he made this statement on Twitter, and then when we were reporting and breaking the story, we would go up there every day, run up to Upper Press and bang down the door and say, okay, today, where's the evidence? The president is making this statement, and where is the evidence? And they haven't since provided evidence into that and have deferred it to this panel. But at the same time, they want all these states to turn over voter information.
That's right, in 20 some odd states too.
Mary, you were
That's
jumping
frustrated a lot of Democrats up here on Capitol Hill too. There's a big movement here by some senators to try and block this effort by the president. Remember, I think you have roughly about 24 states that have now said they're not going to comply with this request to turn over their voter data so that the White House can try and compile this sort of massive database. And senators now are coming to the defense of their governor saying, we agree they have huge concerns about what this could mean for their constituents and whether they feel this is the right sort of use of this administration's time. There's a lot of questions up here on Capitol Hill about this as well, and a lot of frustration. Is this voter suppression, as a lot of critics say, or is this simply the White House doing due diligence, as they would suggest?
And Mary, I know because we have you up there with us. The other thing going on there today is that we know early this morning, Senate Intel had another hearing as the Russia fever continues going through the summer.
And Russia fever, that's Sarah Sanders' description
that's her
of this.
line.
That was her, that's what she said about this. She said
I was on the phone during that part of it, as you two know.
She said it was Russia fever, and she was talking about the Putin meeting that just came out, and that was part of her response. And we should dive into this a little bit because this is a very big deal. We know that this meeting happened. We know that it wasn't mentioned at the time. We also know there was no translator on the American side.
Right. Yeah.
Give it. Well, I want.
Honestly, look. I, as you said earlier, just because of knowing Trump, I really got to say, I truly don't think this is that big of a deal. And I think having seen Trump work a room, as I have many a time, I buy it. I mean, he's walking around, he sees people, he starts talking to a few folks, he sees his wife sitting there, wife and him make contact, they go say hi, he probably pulls up a chair, talks to him. I don't think this is that big of a deal. And I know that, this blog got out there saying it was an hour. We have no idea.
We don't know how long it was, but there is a critical question.
That's the distinction there, is how long was this meeting?
Right.
Was it mingling or was it an hour?
But I just think calling it a meeting is just a little bit of a stretch. Knowing what was going on, what was happening in this room, we saw the early footage. I mean, it was a long table, a whole delegation, who's walking around talking to who.
But there was an important question that was posed to Sarah Sanders today, specifically about this, because there was no American translator that's part of this.
Oh, right, exactly. And that important question was classified information shared with President Putin? Did President Trump share that? And she couldn't answer. I mean, she said, I haven't had a conversation about the details. I think that is key. That's a key statement there. We know that this has been an issue before in the Oval Office when President Trump was in there with the ambassador and Lavrov. So I think that's the key answer here, Santucci.
So, as we mentioned, 20 days since we saw an on-camera briefing, but we did see. All right, before we get to this, Mary Bruce, thank you for being here. We know you got to run. Go make a great television script tonight, 6:30, World News Tonight.
ABC.
We understand, Beckons. Appreciate it.
Gotta keep running.
Yeah, go. So 20 days since we had an on-camera briefing, but we did have a Sean Spicer confirmed.
He was spotted?
He was spotted on camera.
Where?
In front of a camera. He was with our friends at the Christian Broadcasting Network.
Really?
They have a new digital show. Props to the new digital show.
Yeah.
Good for you guys. But take a listen, because he was asked about this issue of on-camera versus off-camera briefings by David Brody over there.
We're here very early in the morning. We stay very late at night. We're engaging with the press all day long, doing interviews like this, communicating with the press, and then we do a briefing every single day. I think for a lot of folks that they're more interested in getting the clip, to put on the internet, to put on their news, and we're not. We're interested in making sure that we communicate with the American people, that we give the press an opportunity to get their questions answered. But we're not here to make it a spectacle either. We want to make sure that we do things that are informative and helpful to get the president's message out, to answer the key questions. So on days when he's talking in particular, we're going to make sure that we let his voice carry the day.
So there he is.
A little hot today outside.
It is hot. It is hot.
A little steamy in D.C.
A little bright.
It is hot. But this has been another one of these striking weeks that goes by, though, where they choose to do it this way. And often they've got a lot of agenda items they do want to be talking about that don't get a lot of coverage because they're not on camera at all. And today, getting into the guts of, I think they were actually well served by Mark Short, because he can answer precisely what their strategy is, and Sarah Sanders behind that. But once again, this is become a camera-shy White House.
It's a little weird. I mean, especially because I think you have to look back to how then the candidate ran his campaign. I mean, there was a Donald Trump press conference every day on the road.
You don't say.
Well,
you know.
I mean, but it was like last minute. It'd be like, okay, we're going to this event. It's high school auditorium. Guys, you're going to the gym, doing a press conference. What? And it would just pop
even on election nights, on primaries, which never happened
before.
No.
It was insane. I mean, it just happened.
Yeah.
It happened in Florida, almost every golf course. That's how we saw them all. But, I'm really surprised by it. And I think, as he has said multiple times, I think it was during that Fox interview early on, that he gave himself an A across the board, but when it came to messaging, he gave his White House a C. and he said that maybe I'll just do it myself. You
Yeah.
know, we'd love for him to do it himself. We'd love to have a press conference with the president. It'd be great to see
I guess
him.
this is his version of himself when he goes out there a little bit and
A
comments
little,
at the
yeah,
top of
it's-
something or
right.
around something. It's comfortable.
Yeah, I was just to say, the argument that this is more substantive, that we
Yeah.
have a more substantive briefing when it's not on camera. I mean, if you think about it, I don't necessarily think that's the case. It's the point you were making, that this is Made in America week. Monday's the perfect day to have an on-camera briefing because they can set the
Tout it,
agenda,
yeah.
they can tout it, it could be on camera, but instead they decide not to do it. And the other thing with that is that the president's tweets are driving the day related to
Right.
Russia, and he's not
Right.
tweeting about these
Yeah.
things. So to counter it with an on-camera briefing, I think, frankly, is a good idea. It's a little confusing why they aren't doing it. I'm with you.
So let's wrap up our show, our third show, and we thank you for watching and being with us with all this. Again, we'll be here every day that there's a briefing. Santucci, what'd you learn today?
I learned that the briefing is getting later and later, and it's going to be a longer day. No, but I do think that you know, one thing that we are going to have to watch for is that threat from the president that we're going to be here until a vote. I think, and this is where we're going to have to turn to you and your expertise, is do we see Wheels Up to Bedminster for the next several weekends or extended long weekends? You know, we know typically that previous presidents, President Obama, would take a long break during August. What's going to happen to President Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I would bounce off that a little bit. I think that we probably will still see those weekends. I know there's been talk about a couple weeks of vacation, but I don't think they can really make that argument now. The president was in there saying, we aren't going anywhere until we get this done. I think another interesting part of those comments that he made today saying, we, he hasn't said this when he's referred to healthcare before. He says, now they have the chance to vote. So it seems like he's bringing it back
That's a good point, Catherine.
to him.
Yeah.
So the they and we point, I think, is an important one. And what I learned today is that Mitch McConnell is frustrated. He's frustrated with his own members. He's frustrated, I think, with the White House. And he is saying, you know what? If you're not going to believe what I'm telling you, I will show you. I will put it out there. I will force my own members, which this is a careful guy, a calculated guy. I will force my own members to go through this to prove to you at the White House.
Right.
He said yesterday, this is on the request of the president and the vice president, prove to you at the White House
that I'm not making it up.
This is how the votes are, this is
Yeah.
what our members are, and let the chips fall, because they're not going to get away without confronting this. So that vote, they are as clear as they can be. They're going to have it next week, even if it's not going to end well for them, which is pretty extraordinary.
Right, exactly.
All right, well, that does it for the briefing room. Once again, we will be here, right here at abcnews.com and at the ABC Facebook page every time there's a briefing. For John Santucci, Catherine Faulders, Mary Bruce over on Capitol Hill, I am Rick Klein. Please watch us next time.